Phill. Please join me on the stage here. Phill, as he put it, has made a lot of mistakes. He screwed things up. He wasted 50,000 pounds. I don't know if he wasted, but we're going to learn all about the mistakes Phill made so we don't have to make them. So, Phill, thank you for being here, and tell us all the good stuff.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been really enjoying listening to all of the great speakers so far. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a sort of pace change. So far today, we've had a lot of speakers talking about very important product marketing topics, positioning, working on your messaging, launching products. And I learned a lot of this before I went into product marketing, and it's really important. You do need it. But I also found when I was in product marketing that there was a level of understanding about my customers that I didn't have. And it meant really, when I started my first product marketing job, I sort of sucked at it. So hi, everyone. I'm Phill. I'm a senior product marketer at Hotjar, and I host a podcast called Nudge, which is the consumer psychology podcast. You can find me on Twitter at @P_Agnew. So let's start with a story about how I wasted £50,000. I went to university 10 years ago, and I signed up for a 4-year marketing and management degree. And I learned all of these good frameworks that are important for somebody in marketing and product marketing to learn. I learned about the 4 Ps. I learned about SWOT analysis. I learned about marketing strategy and pricing strategy. The problem was, when I got into my first job, and after I'd spent this huge amount of money, I was asked to do things which were well outside my comfort zone, and to do things that I guess I didn't expect myself to do as a marketer. Maybe it was to do with working in a slightly smaller business than the marketing textbooks tend to be written for. Maybe it was working in a SaaS business, which tends to move a lot faster and put users at their core. But nevertheless, I was asked to do tasks like write a new product landing page, or launch a new product and encourage our existing customers to use it, or create an end-of-year newsletter. I was asked to do these tasks, and I really had no idea what I was doing. None of the frameworks that I'd learned at university, none of the frameworks that I was picking up in the space really helped me understand what would convince the consumers, the people I was marketing towards, to take action. I just didn't know. So, for example, one of the first tasks I was given as a product marketer, a junior product marketer at the time, was to create an end-of-year newsletter. Now, I'm sure many of you will have done this when they started off in the role. And the end-of-year newsletter was really to highlight all of the brilliant features that we had delivered that year. Now, I was a young product marketer. We had delivered a lot of new features. Customers seemed to like these features. They were being adopted really well. So I thought, hey, let's chuck every single feature in the newsletter. And hey, it ended up being a really long newsletter. Lots of features, lots of functionality, lots of technical descriptions, and it didn't perform well at all. It was only a 1% click-through rate, way less than what we would expect, and really poor for this newsletter because it was meant to be a pretty significant acquisition channel for us at the end of the year. So I failed in this task, but I really struggled to try and understand how I was meant to improve here. There was no clear guidance on how to just get a better understanding of my consumers. I really needed to know this. I was asking myself, how do you convince consumers to act? How do you convince consumers to take action? And it was fortunate that at that time, I was reading around the subject and I started to learn a lot from the field of consumer psychology. I started to read books like this, Influence from Robert Cialdini, which sort of blew my mind in terms of understanding how and why consumers make decisions. And then The Choice Factory by Richard Shotton, which explains really how marketers today using an understanding from behavior science to build better marketing. I started to apply some of this to product marketing, and I haven't looked back since. It's helped me really understand users and create product marketing that really resonates with my customers. And I guess the evolution here is going beyond understanding marketing, which is what I was doing a lot at university, and since in lots of courses, to actually trying to understand consumers. And this links very neatly with lots of what the speakers so far have said around talking to your consumers, getting feedback from them, understanding them. I'm going to try and go one step further today and reveal some insights into how they make decisions, reveal some insights into the psychology behind their buyer behavior. And you can hopefully use those insights to do better product marketing. Now, whether that's building a new landing page, whether that's creating a new pricing strategy, or whether that's writing a newsletter like I was, I don't know, but all of these tips can help in all of these scenarios. So I'm going to share 3 with you today. Now I go into heaps more detail of these on my podcast, so check that out if any of these are interesting. But we're going to cover 3. And the first is distinctiveness. Now, all of you will know about distinctiveness, right? We all know that having a brand, having a product that stands out, that's more likely to stand out, is more likely to be remembered, and therefore more likely to be engaged with. But there's some science behind distinctiveness that we as product marketers really need to understand if we really want to improve our marketing. And this science dates back to 1933. So in 1933, a researcher with an ironically distinctive name, Hedwig von Restorff, was doing research in Berlin at the time, looking at people's recall of basically long lists of letters, like you can see on screen. So she would give participants lists of random letters and ask them to recall them, letters like HRM, TWS, OPS. It's really difficult to recall something like this because there's no logic or structure to them. But hidden within these lists of letters, well, not hidden, it was in plain sight, but she would also include 3 numbers. Now, there's no reason why numbers should be easier to recall than letters. After all, it's the same sort of thing in our brain, they're just different entities. But in the test, the numbers were distinct. They stood out. They were very different from the letters. And that distinctiveness has an effect on recall. It made them 20 times more memorable. Now, you're probably thinking, what the hell does this have to do with product marketing? What the hell does this have to do with brands today? But Richard Shotton, who I referenced earlier, took this exact same finding back in 2018 and applied it to brands. He gave participants a number of brand logos to look at, and after, removed those logos and said, which ones do you remember? Now, in the test, the logos would all come from a similar industry, so the automotive industry in this case. But hidden within the logos was one logo from a different industry, fast food, for example. Now, again, he chose brands specifically, so there'd be no reason why one brand was remembered more than another. There was no reason like none was more popular or famous. And yet still, the brand that stood out, the distinctive brand, was 4 times more likely to be remembered. This is such a crucial thing for us to know because it helps us understand how our consumers make decisions. And yet, so many marketers today fail with this. If you look at a lot of the premium marketing channels, premium sponsorship channels, you'll see real repetition in terms of the types of brands that are advertising. So football, for example, soccer in the US, it's all sponsored by similar companies, beverages companies, typically lager companies, and gambling companies. So 11 of the 20 Premier League clubs have gambling firms on their shirts. That's 19 of the 22 championship clubs in the UK. We see competitors advertising in a space, we see competitors doing something, and we jump to follow them. And yes, there's some logic here. We know that this is where our target audience might be, so it makes sense to do marketing in this space, but it's ignoring the fact that you're losing your distinctiveness and you're far less likely to be memorable. And before we criticize these mammoths who spend millions of dollars on sponsorings, we can look at ourselves as well, because this happens within the SaaS industry too. These are 4 different websites. I know they don't look like 4 different websites, but they are: Zendesk, Asana, Buffer, and Airtable. And we're quick to copy others. We've seen designs that we know that work. We've seen CTAs that look appealing and we think work, so we copy them and do something similar. And this all comes at a cost. Not being distinctive comes at a cost. It means you're less likely to be recalled. But this isn't even my favorite example. My favorite example of this lack of distinctness in our place comes from the watch industry. So these are 3 different watch ads. I know they don't look like it, but they are 3 different watch ads for 3 different companies. Each contain a celebrity either looking into the camera, looking out to the distance with the celebrity holding or wearing the watch. They are very similar. There's very little distinctiveness here. And if you were flicking through a magazine, I doubt you would remember any of these. But there's something which makes me laugh, because look at what the time is set to on the watch. We are so keen to copy others. We're so keen to take the safe road as marketers that we even set the watch to 10 minutes past 10 in each of the advertising examples. And before you say, a tech company, a fast growth, big company that was leading the way in terms of understanding users would never do something like this, well, take a look at how Apple advertised one of their recent Apple Watch launches with the exact same time set. And this is a problem. It's like a distinctiveness, because when we as marketers try to add distinctiveness to our messaging, we see real success. So a few non-sort of marketing examples to kick off. One is from Steve Martin in his book, The Small Big. And he was working with the Australian tax collectors, and they were sending out letters to Aussie residents asking them to pay their tax. Problem is, nobody opened these letters, so people weren't paying their tax on time, and they were racking up big late fees. So they did a simple A/B test. On one of the letters, they sent it out as it usually was, blank, like the one you see on the left-hand side. In the other, they added a stamp in red ink saying urgent. Just that little bit of distinctiveness they hoped would encourage people to open the letter and stop people missing their payments. And it worked. It saved residents $4 million in late fees. Distinctiveness really pays. Here's another example from Copenhagen. Copenhagen had a problem. Tourists were coming to the city and leaving huge volumes of litter on the floor, costing the council heaps of money in terms of employing bin men to go and collect all of this litter. Rather than do an advertising campaign or messaging or reach out to tourists individually, they just used distinctiveness. They painted their bins neon green and painted some footprints on the floor, directing people to the bins. This fairly small tweak resulted in 45% more rubbish ending up in bins, 5% less rubbish ending up on the street. Fascinating example. Now let's go to a marketing example. And this is one that I really like from the UK utilities comparison marketplace. So if you're in the UK, you'll recognize some of these brands. They all do very similar things. If you want to buy a new energy provider, or if you want to change your broadband internet provider, or if you want to get some car insurance, whatever it might be, you'll go to one of these companies and they will compare all of the different offers from utility providers and tell you which one is best. Now, they still be a world away from a lot of the marketing that we do, but there's something really similar about these companies because they all market themselves, or at least back in 2013, they all marketed themselves in very similar ways. They would use language like, we save you more. We can give you a quote very quickly. We can give you a quote in seconds. And we're simple, fast, and easy to use. This was commonplace amongst all of the advertising for all of these firms. And it resonates, right? This is really similar to what a lot of us put together in our day job. We say we're cheapest or we're most economical. We say we're very quick to use, and we say we're easy to use as well. It's classic. We all tend to use the same things because that's the value that our customers want. But what if we made an effort to be distinct? What if we tried something different? Well, that's what Compare the Market did back in 2013. They introduced a meerkat. And the meerkat owned a website called comparethemeerkat.com. And in these 1 minute, 30-second advertising slots, the meerkat would complain, on live TV about how comparethemarket.com was taking all its SEO traffic. This was a really niche joke, essentially, which didn't at all reference any of the benefits Compare the Market offered. Gone were the conversations about how fast it is or easy it is or how much money it saves. All those utility benefits were gone, and instead you were left with a bit of distinctiveness. How did it work? It was massively successful. They had an 83% increase in awareness in the following year and achieved their 12-month objectives within 9 weeks. Now that's pretty impressive, but what I really find impressive is that advertising campaign has worked so well, they still use it today, almost 10 years on. Distinctiveness can really in play and is worth us all learning as product marketers. So we know that standing out improves recall, that's the von Restorff effect, but most brands copy competitors. And here's your advantage, because we know that studies with tax, bins and meerkats prove the success of standing out. So actually being distinct, writing copy, creating landing page, building websites, launching products that stand out is less risky. It's actually smarter because it's more likely to break through the noise and allow us to reach our target audience. So try and sprinkle a little bit of distinctiveness into the next product marketing campaign that you work on. Now the next one, anchoring. Anchoring is the idea that we are heavily influenced by the initial piece of information we see when we're reading about a product, a service, a message, whatever it might be. Anchoring is a really crucial thing for us to learn because it helps us understand how consumers make decisions. And a great way to showcase anchoring is to use this study from Dan Ariely in his book, Predictably Irrational. And in the book, he references a study where participants are given 2 painkillers. Now, the painkillers in the study are identical. There is no difference between them. But the participants don't know this. They're told that one of the painkillers costs $2.50 and one of the painkillers costs just 10 cents. The participants had headaches, so they took the painkillers. Not both of them. One group took the expensive one group took the cheap one, and then they were asked if they felt any better. And maybe unsurprisingly, due to the placebo effect, and I'm sure a lot of you could guess this, those who took the supposedly more expensive pill reported 85% less pain compared to those who took the much cheaper pill. So anchoring has an effect. The way we anchor our product, the message we use to anchor it, is really important, and it dramatically changes how our product is perceived. Another great example of this comes from Richard Shotton again. He went into a boutique London perfume shop and set up a trial to see if people would be more or less likely to buy their perfumes. And the only difference in the trial, the only difference in the A/B test he was running, was that in one set of the trial, the perfumes were priced at $40, a fairly cheap price for high street perfume sales in I think London or New York, wherever he was doing this. And then the other, they were priced at $80. Now the surprising thing here, it goes against all conventional wisdom, it goes against what I would have learned at marketing school, is that people were more likely to buy when the price was higher. Why? It just resonated with the environment they're in. The anchor was more likely to convince them. But anchoring is much more than just whacking a price on something and changing how people perceive it. It can really change our decision making. And a great example of this comes from, again, Dan Ariely. And in his study, he asked his students at the university he was working at to get out their social security cards. These were US students, so they had a social security card. And your social security card contains random digits. There is nothing about the digits on your card which correlate to any of your demographics. He asked them to look at the last number on their card and go into two groups. So move to the left-hand side of the room if your number is between 0 and 4. So a low number, and go to the right-hand side of the room if your number is between 5 and 9, so it's a high number. All he asked his students to do in these randomly assigned groups is remember if they were a high or a low number. He then pulled out a number of different items to the front of the lecture hall. Champagne, bottles of beer, keyboards, marketing books, whatever it was, and said, you can now bid on these items, and whoever is the highest bidder will win. He wanted to see if there was any difference in the anchoring effect. If anchoring yourself to a high or low number changed how much you were likely to bid on these items. And what he found surprised even him, an expert in the field, because those with the high numbers, those who had the high social security number and were put into that high group, bid 3 times more than those with the lowest numbers. That anchor has a dramatic effect, even though there's nothing else that should be swaying us in this direction. Now, this can be and is often very well applied in marketing sense. So Steve Martin and Joseph Marks, in preparation for their book Messengers, went into a London real estate agents here in the UK. They rent and sell houses. And they wanted to see if the initial piece of information that a buyer heard when they were buying a house from this real estate agent could tweak whether they were likely or less likely to use their service. Now, when they were sitting in the estate agents, they heard what the initial piece of information was. And often it would be a receptionist picking up the phone and saying, oh, hi, what would you like? You'd like to buy or sell your house? Brilliant, I'll put you in touch with Peter, he can help you out. And they said, let's tweak that one message, because that's the anchor, and that could have a dramatic effect on how the whole sort of buyer journey goes. So instead of saying, I'll pass you over to Peter, the receptionist was asked to say, I'll pass you over to Peter. He has over 20 years of experience and would be perfect for you. All of this is true. It just adds a bit of anchor, a bit of color, which hopefully should influence the buyer. They then measured the effectiveness, so people who heard this message versus those who heard the normal message, and the results were phenomenal. They increased inquiries to conversions by 20% and ultimately increased sales by those who went down that route by 20% as well. A kind of incredible change just with a little anchor. And a classic example that many of you will know is the iPad launch from 2010. Now, prior to this launch, journalists really debated if we needed an iPad at all. I remember when the iPad came out, I couldn't understand why anyone would buy one. We have phones, we have laptops, why would you need something in between? And they were laughing online about how much this could cost. They were, saying, really, this should cost no more than $150. There's no real need for it. But some journalists, they speculated that it might be more. It might cost up to $999 because there's a lot of smart tech that's being put into it. And after all, the screen is such a large size. Steve Jobs used that as his anchor. He got up on stage, he talked about the benefits of the iPad, and when it got to pricing, he said, some of you in the room, remember the journalists were all in the room at the presentation, some of you in this room have said the iPad could cost as much as $999. That set the anchor. That set the comparison point. He then said, we've worked night and day. We've done as much as we can. We've done incredible innovations to get that price down to just $499. And you can watch this on YouTube. The price literally does smash like that on the screen and it goes into a million pieces. It's funny. He had a knack for animation. But these journalists who just days earlier were saying this product should cost no more than $150 were clapping. They were whooping, they were standing up and cheering, they were saying that's such a brilliant deal. And it's all because of a smart use of anchoring. So when you're talking about price, when you're presenting an offering, when you're trying to convince a consumer to do something, think about the initial anchor they see, because it has an effect. It alters their decisions. And we know that marketing campaigns and sales efficiency massively improves when we use an anchor. We know that prices appear better value, and it's really important that we maybe try and find a way to anchor our message, or at least consider the ways that our message is being anchored as it is. That's the power of anchoring. One final one before I leave you is the power of scarcity. And we all know scarcity. An offer that is running out, an offer that is likely to end, a deal that is likely to end is more likely to convince people into action. At a simpler level, we are fond of scarce resources, and this is due to our evolutionary traits. But there are some wonderful studies that reveal the very interesting ways these work. So the 2000 classic study by Ian Inga was around jam sales, and she went into, I think it was supermarkets in Utah, and set up identical booths to sell jam. Now, on opposing weekends, the booths would change slightly, but usually everything stayed the same. So it was the same salesperson, the same booth, the same branding and coloring. The only thing that would be different on opposing weekends was the number of varieties of jam they sold. On one weekend, they would sell 24 varieties. On the other, they would sell 6. Now, conventional marketing wisdom would suggest that the high variety option would sell more. After all, the consumer can look through the different types of jams and pick the one they liked. This is my exact thought that I had. This is the exact conventional wisdom I had when I wrote that newsletter way back when I started my role. If we give people the choice, they'll be more likely to act. But the opposite is true. People have choice paradox. They prefer scarcity. And when only 6 varieties were on show, 30% of consumers went on to buy, compared to only 3% when 24 varieties were on show. Now, this has been repeated in different ways over the years, and it's now a known phenomenon, the choice paradox. Another example of scarcity comes from movie posters. Again, Richard Shotton, who I've referenced a few times, he showed movie posters to moviegoers and asked them, how likely are you to see this movie? That was for one group. Now, most people say that they're not very likely. We don't tend to go to the movies very much, so only around 10% of people, I think, said they were likely to go. And then to another group, he said something different. He said, how likely are you to see this movie? Oh, by the way, it stops airing this weekend. And when he said that, people were 36% more likely to attend, which is mind-blowing, right? Why do movie posters not include the date they stop airing? Why do they only include the premiere date? Referencing scarcity in our marketing messages, in our product marketing messages as well, can dramatically increase the likelihood that people will act. Scarcity affects us in all sorts of life too. So this is pertinent for me, reaching the end of a decade very soon. When we get to a 9 ending age, 29, 39, 49, 59, we think about the scarcity of our life. We think, unfortunately, that our life is a scarce resource and that we don't have a huge amount of time left. This is from a study referenced in Dan Pink's book, When. And data and data collection and researchers have found that when people reach this age, they're likely to do things very differently. So, for example, you're much more likely to run a marathon, according to marathon sign-up data, when you have a 9 ending birthday, 29, 39, 49. It's a good thing, but it can also lead to some bad things. You are also, according to data from Ashley Madison's website, far more likely to cheat on your partners. Sign-ups were far higher from people with that age in their birthday. And unfortunately, according to census data, you're also more likely to commit suicide at that age as well. Scarcity is a real thing that has huge impacts on the decisions we make, and it's vital that we as marketers understand this when we're trying to convince consumers to act. But I'll finish and I'll leave you with my favorite example of scarcity, and that comes from a US supermarket again. So in the supermarket, they wanted to try and convince people to buy more cans of soup. So they did what all marketers do, and they put out some messaging. They put advertisements all across the supermarket saying, buy soup. soup for sale. The very basic non-value-led marketing, which just talked about the actual item they were selling, not about the value. But then they decided, oh, by the way, when people saw those advertisements, they were likely to buy 3 cans of soup. So it does work, right? Us in marketing, it does work, telling people to do something. They do actually act on it some of the time. And in this scenario, on average, people bought 3 cans of soup after seeing this messaging. And then they said, let's just try and add a little bit of scarcity, a stupid bit of scarcity. They put an asterisk on the banners and said sales limited to 12 cans per person. Now this is stupid because nobody was buying 12 cans before and nobody had any intention of buying 12 cans of soup. But still, it added a little bit of scarcity into the message. And did it have an effect? Yeah, people, after seeing that message, bought almost 50% more, 4.5 cans of soup on average, just after seeing a little bit of scarcity. So scarce resources, they're valued higher, behavior shifts when scarcity is known. It is one of the simplest ways to improve your messaging. And we should emphasize scarcity to influence behavior as well. That's the power of scarcity. And to go back to that example I gave you right at the start, I've been able to leverage some of this knowledge and use it within my marketing. So that end of year newsletter, I did it again the following year after reading about scarcity and the choice paradox. And instead of including every single update under the sun, I just included a few highlights that I knew our customers got value out of. And by learning about how consumers make decisions and by applying that to my work, I saw massive improvements. So a huge lift here. This is just one of the many examples that I talk about on my podcast, Nudge. So if you're interested in how each of these principles, and those are just 3 we've talked through today, there are hundreds more that we go into on the show. I talk about them every 2 weeks on the show, talking to authors, researchers, and pioneers in the space, asking them how we've applied this and making that reference back to marketing and product marketing. And for those of you who've listened to me today, thank you, all of you. I've got a special offer for you. So in addition to the podcast, I also have a free to access course called the Science of Marketing course. You can find it by going to nudgepodcast.com and clicking on course. The course has 5 hours of content just like this, explaining how each of these effects can be used to improve our marketing. The problem is, usually this course has a very long waiting list. I can only usually allow 10 people onto the course at the time. But for anybody who signs up today, so anybody who signs up within the next 24 hours, I will not put you onto the waiting list and grant you immediate access. Or if you want to sign up later, just email me at nudgepod@gmail.com. And tell me that you've watched this talk, and I'll give you access without accessing the waiting list as well. It's 5 hours of content available for free. So to sum up, product marketing is about really making content and creating messaging and positioning that resonates with our consumers. That's what we're all trying to do. That's what all the speakers today have encouraged you to do. I would encourage you to go a little bit further. If you really want to understand your consumers, actually try and understand the science behind how they make decisions and look at the world of consumer psychology, because that's helped me greatly in improving my work as a product marketer. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Phill. Nice use of scarcity there. Only 10, eh? I'm gonna beat you all there. All right.
Get it into everything.
We have questions. So there's a question about the reasons for the sameness. So if all the startups look the same, is it the factor of that everybody's copying everybody, or is it that everybody's reading the same color psychology blog posts and they all want to be trustworthy and hence use blue?
Look, there'll be heaps of reasons for this. I mean, you know, there's the brands, but there's also the classic example of the Google apps recently, which we all saw. You know, Gmail, Drive, it all looks the same now. And so there's probably a lot of studies that suggest that similar looking items get more clicks, and that encourages that and that creates a feedback mechanism. But hey, there's definitely something at play, which is that we just feel safer doing something that we've seen elsewhere. We feel safer doing it. You know, you see it all the time with brands. If you're building a redesign for your website, you'll do the classic thing where you're like, let's look at what our 5 competitors or our 5 admired brands are doing, and that will feed into your process, and that can be really useful. You can get some really good insight there, but often we take it too far. Often we end up copying things like the exact color, like you said in the question, or in fact designs as well, like we saw in those SaaS examples. And the whole plea to people listening in is that copying competitors is not safe. It is way more risky than doing something distinct, because if you don't do something distinct, you won't stand out, you won't be recalled. Copying competitors is only going to mean you're left by the wayside and just one of many. But if you stand out, you actually have a chance of really resonating.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Have you seen that study by Google where they analyzed what makes people like a particular website? And TLDR, they pinned it down to two factors: visual complexity. We like simple more than complex, less noise. And then prototypicality, meaning that it looks like the websites we've seen before. Because most people, where do they spend their time? On other websites. So websites that have innovative layouts and things like that didn't score well in terms of liking. What's your take on that?
This is complex stuff, isn't it? You've got a finding there which is suggesting, almost the opposite. Sometimes similarity is not useful, and this is true as well. If you're a small brand, when you're pushing your product, it's useful to use terms that people are familiar with. It's useful to talk about value that people know. I spoke about how it can be really detrimental to say things like, we're the fastest, we're quick, and we're cost efficient, but that also is useful as well. Two things can be true at once. The plea here is, I reckon that distinctiveness will help, but I don't know if I can't guarantee it. So it's always worth trialing these things. It's always worth testing. We just had a brilliant speaker from Unbounce on. This is one of the best ways to do it. You can quickly compare two pages side by side, run A/B tests, and actually see what performs better. Because as always with nudge theory and consumer psychology, there's no one size fits all. We never know if it will work in your industry with your audience. So it's definitely worth testing. But in general, yes, you're right. A simpler web page is good. In general, using language that people understand and reference is always useful, but that doesn't mean you can't be distinct. That doesn't mean you have to use the exact same cartoons that your fellow SaaS product used.
100% agree. Thank you, Phill. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Cheers, everyone.